I'm curious to know from your experience working 18 years in private equity, what differentiates the good private equity investor, specifically around the MBA level, the good MBA level private equity investor versus the very good ones?
What I find is clearly differentiate the good from the great associate level, VP level folks is
Joe, thank you so much for joining me for this conversation. I'm very excited to talk to you about all things career, finance, private equity, MBAs, HBS.
life.
You've got life. You've got so much experience, and I can't wait to dive into it with you. Thanks for your time here. I think it's going to be super helpful to a lot of people just in general.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's going to be super helpful for people. So I'll stop myself in my excitement here and hand it over to you to if you would, introduce yourself and give us a little bit of background on who you are.
Okay, sure. And I'll start, I guess, somewhat in the way back. So I'm a Southern California native, grew up in Hollywood, not the nice part. I like to tell people it was, working class environment. My father's an immigrant from Nigeria. My mother here actually, while he was on a student visa. And so, once he met my mom and I was born, decided to stay. I grew up in Hollywood, moved to the Covina area, which is the Inland Empire, around 11. Candidly, was never a great student, but I think once I got out there and was living with my dad, I really kind of started to focus more on school and being the son of a Nigerian immigrant. School was very important. And education was very important, which will kind of come in. I'll bring full circle later in this conversation. But that really kind of was a pivotal change for me just in terms of my academics. So I came into high school joining a honors program, the International Baccalaureate, which was a struggle for me at first, but I worked through it and ended up graduating with pretty good GPA, making my way to USC. With a scholarship, partial scholarship. At USC, I decided to go into business. To my father's chagrin, he wanted me to go into medicine, but I had really no interest in medicine. Quite frankly, if you go back into my freshman year of high school, I was really into stocks, kind of the stock nerd. I was the captain of our stock team for the Future Business Leaders of America. Very impressive founding organization for our high school. But anyways, I wanted to go into business, study finance. And, early on, I was very interested in Wall Street and banking. So while at USC, I joined a few clubs and became president of a couple of them, one being an investment club. So kind of, again, back in the stock theme, investing for our own portfolio, just understanding and learning a little bit more about markets and market dynamics. And, I met somebody, I think, just serendipitously at a scholarship luncheon at USC who pushed me to apply to an internship program through an organization, a great organization called Sponsors for Educational Opportunity, which is a group that has been working for decades to help, people of color to gain access to jobs on the street and diverse applicants more generally kind of gain jobs on the street. And so I was fortunate enough to get accepted, and I joined Merrill Lynch as an intern. I did 2 summers with Merrill in the financial institutions group, so within banking, investment banking, and joined full-time after graduation in 2003. Was a great time to be kind of working in investment banking. I mean, the first 7 months, we were just so busy. I literally worked every single day, Monday through Sunday, and probably put in, 20-hour days, like kind of the craziness of it.
Mm-hmm.
And, I was at a time in my life where I could physically do that. And even, sometimes go out afterwards for a couple of drinks and wake up and do it all over again the next day. I don't know how I did that. But those were great times. Learned a ton, kind of drinking from a fire hose. Did a lot of interesting deals, M&A, some equity and debt offering, kind of really had a chance to, really get a better view of what it means to be an investment banker. I started to also learn at that time that, having just a short purview into the investment process was not really that satisfying. You kind of come in just for the transaction. So whether it's helping somebody sell their business or helping somebody buy their business, but kind of all the work that goes in between, you're really not part of, and started to become more and more interested in principal investing, private equity specifically, and started to think about a career in private equity, really kind of 2 years or so into my investment banking career. I think I got the third year analyst promotion and then left around that time. I had, I was in financial institutions, which is a little bit of a different beast. Most people kind of think of the FIG bankers as being kind of the quirky bankers. We're dealing with balance sheets versus, generally balance sheets versus, businesses that are producing products or services. And, so I think that was a little bit of a challenge initially to kind of get out of, because, as an analyst in FIG, a lot of the folks who were most interested in you to go into kind of principal investing were folks who had a FIG focus. I kind of felt like I wanted to branch out and do more. But I got a couple of really good opportunities and stumbled on a firm in particular based out of the West Coast that was up and coming, running their first institutional fund. And, kind of a lot of the cultural dynamics and the narrative around the firm really resonated with me. It was a firm founded by non-traditional folks, more operationally focused kind of people, not necessarily your ex-bankers or ex-Wall Street type people, not the white shoe, Ivy League crew. And, they had a very differentiated approach to doing deals, which I thought was interesting and wanted to be part of. And I thought in terms of scratching that itch of wanting to be more ingrained in the ownership and investment side of doing deals, a firm, like that's a little bit more hands-on, I thought was probably a better purview. So I joined this firm in 2006 and, wore a ton of hats early on. I was one of their first quote unquote traditional hires. Heretofore they had brought people in either from other operational type roles or right out of undergrad. Not a lot of people coming in from the junior ranks, from Wall Street. So I came in and I supported a number of the deal guys, covering a ton of industries, tech, telecom, media, industrial, chemicals. And so learned a ton within a short time frame. I had always had aspirations to go back and do my MBA. And so around 2000, I guess this was 2007, started applying, going through the motions to apply. Around the same time, I met my future wife, and she was just about to enter into dental residency for pediatric dentistry. And so she was looking at schools, and, I was kind of like, well, maybe I should take the first year. She actually did interview at Harvard, but ended up matching with USC, my alma mater. But, long story short, I wanted to go back to school. The firm I was where they were very clear, you do not need to go back to school. Again, back to kind of the ethos and the culture. These are non-traditional, non-kind of MBA folks. And they said, you don't need to do that. You can stay and have a great, career without, getting your MBA. And, for me, it was a personal thing I really wanted to do. And once, they knew I was going to do it, and they were supportive. So I entered HBS in 2008, which we all know was a very interesting time. So
that's
hopefully background. I can give you more.
No, that's
but I got you all the way.
No, that's great background. I'll just it sounds so. You did grew up in LA, went to SC. I have that in common with you. Did business program there, which is phenomenal. I also went to Merrill Lynch in their investment banking group after undergrad, so we have that in common as well. But so you did the 2 years banking, 2 years private equity, then you went to business school in 2008. That's a pretty like traditional path. I would say a lot of people tend to come from that background. At least it seemed like that because we're from that background. I did a very, very similar thing. You mentioned you'd always, had the idea of an MBA, I guess early on, you had the idea of the MBA in your head. Where did that come from? Did you know people that had MBAs, and did you read about them somewhere?
So candidly, I didn't know a lot of MBAs, but back to kind of my upbringing, having a Nigerian father, education was very important, and I think I had always anticipated doing some kind of. Obviously, I was going to college. That was a given. And then I always kind of thought I was going to do something, after undergrad. So I think the seed was planted way back when. But once I got to investment banking and Wall Street and started to interact with a lot more people who went through the MBA program, I think it really started to kind of, percolate in my head. It's something I really wanted to do. And, you mentioned timing wise, after your analyst program, it's usually too early. And then too far into your post-analyst program, life starts to happen, right? And it becomes more and more complicated if you're now kind of up against getting married and, just other things are kind of happening.
Totally.
So there's a window. Yeah. And so you're right. I was kind of right in that window. And I knew I was kind of, my late 20s. I was right at the kind of the quote unquote easiest
sweet spot
to life.
Yeah, it's a sweet spot. The other component there too, I think, Joe, is like your salary just keeps rising, in the career path you were leading, and so it would be harder and harder to walk away from that the longer you waited, right? So the opportunity cost would become a bigger and bigger hurdle. So when you joined Platinum, it was like an entrepreneurial, like different type of fund, right? And that's really cool. I'm curious, did that feed into, I want to ask you about your application. Do you even remember like what your pitch was to HBS and the other schools you might have applied to? Like, hey, like, let me in here.
I do remember, some of the pitch. And, kind of one, I think by way background for undergrad, I didn't really apply to many schools. I got into pretty much every school I applied to, but for one, my number one choice.
Call them out here right now. Call them out. Make them.
For the number one.
Let them know they made the mistake.
And look, I think in retrospect, and I think this is important, especially for maybe some of your younger listeners. I was so active. I was doing a bunch of things, but in terms of me spending the time on my application, I did not get it justice. And so when I came into the MBA application process, not that I held a grudge against Stanford, but I didn't apply there. I knew I wanted to go East Coast because I went West Coast for undergrad, and I knew I wanted to kind of help develop a bigger network on the East Coast. So I applied to 2 schools, and I went all in, and I spent a ton of time, researching those schools and researching kind of what had from a prior application process, what were kind of successful strategies, and just really trying to kind of take a more intentional approach to my applications. And for HBS, I think the things that I talked about the most were, obviously I was a private equity guy and I like the industry. I want to stay in the industry. I talked about a desire to merge my private equity experience with, the fact that I am of African descent, and I have, relationships in Nigeria to do more private equity investing in Africa. And, there were a couple of groups and professors and folks who were kind of in and around that at HBS that I called out specifically within my application. So I made a very, I think, thoughtful plea for the, admission. And, I had all of the literature that I had read about applying to, top tier schools. It's not enough to have, the grade, the good GMAT, and, obviously the kind of competitive career, but it's also you want to kind of demonstrate the need and the willingness to accept if you're granted that spot. And so I thought, the best way to do that was to really be specific in my application and less kind of general about, wanting to, develop business skills, because, obviously you can do that in many other places.
Totally.
So that
Yeah,
was
I
my
do want to.
strategy.
That's a great pitch. I want to call out, because it might not be super apparent to everyone like what you did, but you went really deep on your research around specific professors at HBS and what they cared about and what their interests were. And you demonstrated that you had similar interests, right? So you're aligning your interests with something that was already trending, or where there were resources being allocated to at the program you are most interested in. And you made that known. That's really great. I think like that level of research is kind of like a requirement probably for many people that are admitted to the programs. And the other thing you mentioned, which I don't hear this often, but now that you say it really resonates with me. It's your I don't know what were your exact words, but your idea of you have to make it known that like if you get the invite, you're coming, right? This is truly like where you want to be. And you don't just say that like, hey, like if you give me the invite, I'm coming. You don't say that in your essay, but there's a way to demonstrate that based on, your approach to your application, I think.
Yeah, look, I mean, there's specific things that HBS, obviously can offer that no other school can offer, right? So I was very focused on that. And I also applied to Wharton and was accepted there. Very similar strategy, but my first choice and real, clear first was HBS. It's always been a dream of mine. And, candidly, I wasn't sure how much I would do kind of on the international front, but I did know that I really wanted to continue to, broaden my network within private equity and finance. And I thought HBS could do a great job of that. I did also want to kind of broaden my network internationally in case there was opportunities for me to do something abroad. And then also just more generally, I think HBS, where they stand out is the methods that they use to teach, the format, I think is very conducive to a level of strategic thought and interaction. And I just think it's a very interesting approach that, quite frankly, there's tidbits of a lot of cases and a lot of classes that have stuck with me, right? I don't think learning through a textbook would have ever, yielded the same results. And so I think just that all kind of resonated with me, and I was really eager to join, that program. Not to mention, I kind of back in life, I learned, kind of back to my story about how I was not a great student, coming into high school. One of the big changes for me was just, starting to be surrounded by these kids in this honors program. And, I think there's a Jim Brown or somebody said that you're the average of the 5 people you hang out with, or you're closest,
Yeah.
just
what my take on that is now? It's like you're the average of the people in your group chat. Because now it's like we don't really hang out with people anymore. It's like your group chat, your text chat. It's like they're in your brain. Cool. You know what I mean?
That's probably dangerous for me. I don't want to call on my group chat, but that's probably dangerous for me. But I got to see the switch that can be flipped when you're surrounded by people who want to do interesting things, who are motivated, who are, focused. And that was a very important lesson for me early in life. Maybe it was later than others, but early, for me, it was still at a time when I could take those lessons kind of early in my high school career and really use them, still kind of today. So HBS to me seemed like, one of the greatest opportunities to be surrounded by some of the brightest minds, most ambitious people who are going to do phenomenal things. And just by being kind of in their sphere, I think, I, as a person and, motivated to do bigger and better things. And so I think, that's one of the, I know you're going to ask me the ROI question, but I think that's one of the biggest things you get out of
totally
a business school.
Yeah, I I don't know if this is what yours, I get a lot of inspiration from like my classmates. I got it when I was in that classroom with them every day. But even now today, just seeing what everyone's doing just gives me a lot of inspiration and good energy. Speaking of being around all these people, I want to take it to your years at HBS, I guess 2008, around that time. The experience at HBS is fairly well documented. I think like it's like the case method. There's trips involved and that sort of thing. There's some certain professors that are quite well known in the business world, for sure. When you think about your HBS experience and also like the audience here, like people maybe that are investment banking analysts or analysts at McKinsey in their second year, or just people in other industries, what's something about HBS like that? That you remember that was important to you, impactful, something that stands out to you that maybe is not so apparent to that audience?
Ooh, there's probably a lot of directions I can take this, but
Yeah.
I guess a couple of things. One, to put it into context, when I was in business school, the world of the free fall during the Great Recession. And I think it actually was probably one of the most interesting times to be in business school because we were kind of in the fishbowl, and the level of speakers and just the overall, conversations that we had about the economy and the world. I think we're just really insightful and powerful. Not to mention, President Obama was elected during that time. There's a lot of things going on that I think were really great discussion points. I think one thing as I reflect on my experience, there's a lot of things I can highlight, I think, that are really positive about HBS. And you mentioned travel. Travel high on the list. You travel in your classification is one of the most fulfilling things you can do, and also enriching in terms of your relationships with people. I was in also a little unique situation because I was dating my now wife, long distance girlfriend. So there was a lot of, I think I was balancing, traveling back and forth between the East Coast, West Coast, so that we could spend quality time together. But, one thing is I reflect on, my experience at HBS, and I think one thing that maybe I didn't expect coming into it was there were some very powerful tools that I think I got out of, the classes and the model. And in particular, and I always tell people I've had the number one class that I had at HBS was DSSE. This is Clay Christensen's class.
Mm-hmm.
I still reference that class today, and unfortunately I didn't have it with Clay. I had it with one of the other professors, but I think I still got a lot out of it. And in particular, if I were to think about or sum up to somebody, okay, what did I get out of HBS? What did I get out of it besides all of the, clearly the relationships and the experiences? One would be just the idea of how to think. And I wasn't anticipating this coming into the program. I think I had anticipated maybe, learning more functional skills, kind of more financial, obviously learning about maybe specific strategic tools. But the idea of, Professor Christie, he talks about, prescriptive theory and developing frameworks. I think it's probably one of the most powerful things that I took away from that institution. And I use it in every facet of my life, personal, professional. And, look, in essence, I think what he kind of, and not just him, but others, I think HBS is a very framework heavy school. We learned the process of distilling problems into, discrete variables and assessing those variables with the lens of, okay, if this happens, then this happens, and really trying to take a more methodical approach to problem solving. And I think that's such a powerful tool and skill set. And so anyways, as I kind of think about, your question about HBS, I think for me, Christensen, huge impact in my life, and the way he taught and kind of the idea of thinking through frameworks and models. And I build frameworks for everything.
Yeah.
I recently left my private equity firm after 18 years, and part of that process was me developing the framework from which I could assess, the pros and cons, and ultimately made the decision to leave. And so I think, anyways, that's kind of a skill that I wasn't expecting to get coming into it, but I think it came out with, and I'm very appreciative.
No, that's a really good one. I think it's like a unique perspective that no one else that we've interviewed thus far has shared. It's truly that BSSC had such a big impact on you, Clay Christensen, and just this idea of frameworks. It's something that has unknowingly seeped into my life too. Everything needs to be a framework, and it's just so helpful. It's almost like, it's like principles, frameworks, that sort of thing, to help you essentially get to where you want to go, be who you want to be, live the life you want to live. So,
Right.
very,
Right.
very, very
You took it
insightful.
into how will you measure your life? I mean,
Yeah,
it's
he's
kind
got a
of,
great book. Yeah, like how do you measure your life? Or yeah, that's another great one. No, thanks for sharing that, Joe. And one thing I also did, changing gears here a little bit. One thing I wanted to ask you about, which I know about your time at HBS, is like you were sponsored, right, by the private equity firm, by Platinum. So sponsorship is essentially meaning they're paying for your tuition, I think, is generally
yeah,
speaking. And there's
yeah,
other companies that do this, and then usually there's some kind of agreement that you will come back to the firm, and that makes sense for the company because they're saying like, hey, we're investing in you. You're going to go to an MBA program, HBS in your case. You're going to come back with new leadership and managerial skills, new hard skills, new soft skills, and you're going to be an even greater asset to this company. So yeah, we're going to sponsor you, and then you're going to come back here and bring those to this company, right? Could you, for people who aren't aware of this or just who haven't gone through this themselves, might be considering going down this path, could you share a little bit about your experience with being a sponsored MBA student?
yeah. No, as I mentioned earlier, the firm was very clear. I did not need to go. But once I, kind of, made it clear that I was going to go, I got in. They were very supportive, and they actually suggested the sponsorship route, which meant for me, they would pay for room and board, and I would agree to come back over the summer and full time post business school. And I think we had kind of a 3-year arrangement. Obviously I could leave anytime, but I would owe the tuition back to them. And I think it was amortized over 3 years. I think, look, first of all, context, Great Recession. I probably looked like a genius. I didn't know we were walking into the Great Recession, but I probably looked like a genius, right? Because I had, not only did I have someone helping me pay for school, but I also had a job on the back end when I graduated in 2010. But I think, as I reflect on that experience and the decision to essentially close the door to any other opportunity, for all intents and purposes, may not have been the wisest decision. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm very grateful for my experience. And, I think even if I had quote unquote optionality, I might have ended up back at the same firm. But there is something that happens in your interactions at school that is different, right? And there's path dependencies, so to speak, right? With deciding, okay, I've already kind of committed to this firm. And even though you can say, well, I'll take the money, and if something really exciting happens, I'll decide to, pay it back. And then I'm kind of, in no different position. I think for most people, myself included, it's almost like you've made that commitment, even though there's quote unquote out, and there's an interpersonal dynamic to that, that I think is very, very pulling. So, I would say, and I was also kind of one of those people who wasn't necessarily transitioning careers. And as some people come in, they want to do something completely different. I liked it. But I would say for folks who are considering the sponsorship route, really, you really think about how, you envision your long-term career and make sure that you feel good about essentially closing doors before they're open, so to speak. I still vividly remember conversations with folks who were like, yeah, I want to start a business. You want to start a business with me? I said, well, I'm kind of doing this other thing. Right.
Yeah.
And so, obviously no one knows where things could have gone, but I think one of the values of, the microcosm that is your MBA and Harvard in particular is really interacting with people and being open to kind of where, the world's going to take you, where the universe wants to take you. And I think there's value in that, and don't sell that short.
Totally. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. It's like, even if you do go into the program with an open mind with sponsorship, you know that you've made a commitment, or there's a lot on the line, on this commitment. And so you're going back. So it might, even for the most curious person, the most open-minded person, prevent them from going down some rabbit holes that could end up being something interesting. I think that's
right.
What you're saying.
And a corollary to this, by the way, that I tell people, you're coming out of business school, is take risks early, right? We didn't get to kind of where I am now. I'm in my 40s, early 40s, but I'm in my 40s, and I recently left my firm after essentially being affiliated with them for 18 years to start a business. That's a very daunting task with 2 kids, a mortgage and all of that. I think it's a much easier thing to kind of wrap your brain around when, you're right out of business school, a few years out. And so having that flexibility to take risks early in your post-MBA career, I think is super powerful.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that. I felt that almost immediately post-MBA, first couple years working at BCG, and I had feelings that I wanted to try starting a business. And I could see how it was already becoming harder and harder, almost by the day when I look back at it. So I ended up, taking the leap, but I felt that it was very real, that feeling. So what you're describing is very real. I want to come back to what you're doing today and also your 18 years in private equity. But before that, you mentioned something around your time at HBS. It was a tumultuous time, the Great Recession, 2008, 2009. We're in a moment right now, too. It's 2024. It's February 1st, 2024. I think second-year MBA students are having a hard time right now. They've got bad timing. They've got timing working against them. There's a lot of layoffs in the news. It seems like almost every day. It started in tech like a year or two ago. It's still in tech, and I think it's kind of seeping into the media industry and various industries now. What would you tell first and second year MBAs that are in their programs now? They committed to this program. It's a big investment, and they're reading the news and they're not feeling great about it. You kind of went through you were in your MBA program at a similar point in one of the last cycles. What would you tell them?
Well, I mean, this is not going to be very comforting, but I think we're going to get through this, and they're going to have a very successful career, and there's going to be lots of opportunity. Just generally, I'm super bullish on kind of where we're going. And I think I'm a big believer in the rate of change and, innovation. I mean, we're kind of at a very, very exciting moment in history. And so I think for people coming out of HBS that are relatively young and ambitious and, creative, I think they're going to have so many opportunities. So, I mean, I know people, well, I need to make it a living and feed myself. I get that. I mean, I think, look, I would say, clearly there's going to be a need to be more expansive in whatever job search you're doing. I get calls all the time the, more of that, being proactive and also being, kind of open to different or unique types of opportunities. I feel like you mentioned all the layoffs. I feel like there's kind of at the upper end of organizations, the bigger organizations, you're seeing that contraction, but kind of in the middle market, you're seeing the reverse, right? And so I think, maybe not necessarily, just look at the big bulge bracket firms, but also look at some of the smaller firms that are in growth mode because they know, we're going to be at a pretty interesting period of time very quickly, given kind of what's happening from a pure innovation perspective. So anyways, I think it's, obviously be more aggressive, proactive, more expansive with your search. And, stay positive. I really do fundamentally believe that this is probably one of the best times to be graduating from HBS. And I know that it may not feel like that, but I really do believe it.
Yeah, and I think that, you've got real perspective. You were in the same place at the last cycle, so I think that means a lot. Your honest response to that question, so appreciate that. Some of those current MBA candidates, MBA students, are interested in private equity. And you've worked in private equity, like you said, for 18 years. I've got two questions about this experience, but one of them is specifically tailored to those folks who are interested in pursuing a job or a career in private equity. In your 18 years, you've worked with a lot of private equity associates, analyst associates, investors of all levels of seniority, but specifically are focused on this kind of like MBA level private equity investor. I'm curious to know what differentiates a good private equity investor and the very good private equity investor.
Yeah. So, look, I think there's clearly a level of technical competence needed, and you get those skills actually probably mostly from investment banking, but you can also supplement it with business school and training the streets and different types of programs where you're learning Excel and all of that. So there's the technical component. What I find is clearly differentiates the good from the great associate level, VP level folks is a natural level of curiosity and a desire to be, fully engaged in the transaction process, not just going through the motions. And that level of curiosity and kind of, innate motivation is really hard to fake. And I think it's hard to necessarily try to train. So I think, it's probably more a function of, is private equity investing in businesses a good fit for that person? Do they have a natural interest in it? Or are they doing something because of other reasons, right? They think, it pays well or whatever. I don't think that's going to ultimately get you kind of where you want to go within the industry.
Yeah. Joe, what's an example of like when you of that curiosity, like it, when it comes to the work, like you've seen, what's an example, let's break like a tangible thing like that a very good investor you've seen them do, and then the good version is something like a little bit less curious, I guess you could say.
Yeah. So it appears in various ways. So one is, the idea of being a quote unquote self-starter, right? People who are just naturally interested and engaged in the work that they're doing are going to get up and do it. You know what I mean? They're going to want to go and say, hey, this is an interesting problem. Let's try to figure out, how do we solve for it? This is an interesting business. Let's try to figure out what makes it tick. And is it a good investment and why, right? So I think, that's just that natural kind of, self-starter type personality, really, I think is a result of you're curious and engaged in the work that you're doing. I also think that it appears and manifests in your perspective and willingness to share perspective on investments. Now, granted, there's going to be more senior folks who are going to have divergent views. That's okay. I think part of any good private equity firm is going to be a willingness and openness to divergent views, right? I think it's a little bit of threshold kind of competency to have any staying power in the industry. But, I think if you're really engaged in the work and that's really curious and, kind of, you're staying up late on your own, trying to figure out, is this a good investment and why? And you're willing to kind of share those insights and those perspectives. I think that's part of, the differentiation between somebody who can do the work and somebody who really enjoys the work and kind of shows a level of, engagement and excitement and interest that stands out from the crowd. Does that make sense?
That makes total sense. Yeah, you it's almost like, this is like an unsatisfying answer probably, but to my own question, but it's like you can kind of feel it, I would say. And it manifests in different ways, like you mentioned. It's just someone who's there, what might look like a small problem they can like sweep under the rug. That person's going to dive into that problem. They're going to dive deep into it, try to find different solutions, and they're going to be proactive about expressing how they feel about certain things, whether it's an investment thesis or just solutions to a problem. You can feel it. You can feel it in the room when someone's like really into the job.
I kind of think of, that strong associate VP level person as being a deal nerd, right? Yeah. You're totally geeking out over all of the aspects of the deal. And, they're thinking about, there's clearly a lot of things to think about in private equity. It's not just the financial, just legal aspects that you're trying to think through, the thing to the macro, the strategy. And they're doing a lot of that without someone telling them, hey, go do that, because they actually really they're enjoying the work. And so, I don't know, that's kind of a hard thing to necessarily train. But I think it is a differentiator between people who can do the work. I mean, understand, if I say, hey, go build this model, they can do it. But that's not necessarily what I think you would say somebody who's great at as an associate or VC. I'm not sure that kind of reflective of that.
Yeah, got it. Cool. And so again, around leaning into your 18 years of experience at private equity, and specifically with the one firm, Platinum Equity, I'm curious, Joe. This is like a little bit outside the context of an MBA, but I'm just personally curious. I think it's extremely rare these days to meet someone who spent 2 decades at one company. Most people spend 2 years at one company and then move on to the next for various reasons, myself included. Before starting HireFrame, my company today, which was started 4 years ago, this is the longest job I've ever had. Before that, it was 2 years kind of pattern. You spend 2 decades at one company, and I think that's rare. I want to hear more about that experience.
Yeah, no, and I mean, that also that feeds into how difficult my recent departure, deciding to kind of leave, ultimately was. Look, I think it's hard because everyone's life and journey can take a multitude of directions, right? It's hard to know exactly if I had left Platinum 10 years ago, what would I have done? I mean, it's impossible to know. So I think, and this is part of like the framework, as I was thinking through, and I'm happy to share it. I don't know if it will help.
Please do. Yeah, I would love it if you're open to sharing the framework.
Yeah, well, it's nothing out of the, revolutionary, but I started thinking, okay, what makes a good career? What makes a good job? And, what are the attributes? And there's a temporal element, right? Because, what makes a good job for a 22-year-old is not what's going to make a good job for a 42-year-old, right? Or a 62-year-old for that matter. And so understanding those ingredients, and there's a highly personal element to them. But for me, I kind of thought, this is me, I kind of thought about it in a few buckets. One, the ability to learn and continue to learn. 2, the ability to grow, however you define that. But I think it's really taking what you learn and applying it. 3, upside, right? Kind of, what are you doing with that, learning and how you grow and to actually enrich yourself, whether it's financially or some other way. And then purpose, like what do you ultimately, I think this is important. This becomes more important as you get older, right? What do you how will you reflect on your contributions in your work life? Which, quite frankly, could be you're spending more hours in your work life than probably anything else, right? With your spouse, with your kids, right? So it's super critical, and I get that some people kind of look at their jobs and careers as being a means to an end. And I think most people who go to HBS don't view it that way, right? They view their professional lives as being a huge part of who they are. So those four kind of things, I think, is a temporal element. When you're early in your career, learning is much more important than maybe purpose, but the purpose is still important. And then at the center, it's kind of like, do you find the work enjoyable? Is it engaging? Like, are you interested in it? Because, you're not really interested in the work you're doing. You're never going to be good at it. You're never going to. And the people. Do you like the people you're around at work, right? Are you enjoying it? So, for me, that was kind of my framework as I was thinking through, okay, well, that's what makes a good career, good job. Did it fit at this point in my life with my current employer? And I think, there were elements that definitely still fit, but there were elements that I felt like, I probably needed to branch out and do something wildly different. And, that was kind of the deciding factor for me. It's not to say that, 10 years ago, I would have had the same perspective. I think it's, you evolve as a person and your kind of wants and needs evolve. And so for me, it just wasn't a good fit anymore. In terms of spending 18 years at any one place, I don't know if there's necessarily, it's a very highly personal and individual specific, kind of decision and whether it's good for you or not. And it's also dependent on the firm. When I joined 18 years ago, the firm I was working was very entrepreneurial, very different than it is today, right? It's grown. They manage nearly 60 billion, global firm. You can imagine as any institution becomes bigger, it changes, it evolves, it becomes more of a bureaucracy, more of kind of what you would expect a larger organization to be. Nothing against that. It's just that, they're kind of polar opposites. So then it's a question of, well, as the firm evolves, as the job evolves, does it fit you anymore or not? And so it may actually fit people better. And so that would justify staying, but it may not, right? So I think, really, I take the point that most people, especially coming out of HBS, don't spend that much time, usually in any one place. And I think, that may be a good thing for some people and maybe a bad thing for some people because, depending on where you land and, the framework, where you feel like that organization is hitting on each of those variables, it may be the perfect place to stay until you retire, and to leave it would be kind of a disservice to yourself. So it's kind of it's a non-answer, but, I think I'm unique in that I stayed there as long as I did, and I probably should have reflected earlier, but I don't know if it would have changed the decision-making too much. Maybe I would have left a few years ago, but it wouldn't have been, 10 years ago kind of deal.
Yeah, no, I think you covered that perfectly. I think the one thing I'll add from my experience to this conversation is just having spent just 2 years in one place a few times over, there's a lot of benefits to that, right? Especially early in your career, because you get to experience you have a broader experience, industries, roles, people, that sort of thing. That's really good. But the thing I missed out on is, I guess when you're able to stay at a company for a number of years, call it a handful of years, you get past that initial burst of having to figure out the business, having to figure out the people, and then you have the relationships you need to then operate at a much higher level, I think, where you're thinking about the business more strategically because you're not worried about, you already have the trust of your colleagues, you already understand the business. You don't need to worry about performance reviews. You just need to worry about performance, right? I think that's something that I missed out on in my first few jobs where I just did 2-year stints. So I think you probably experienced that. You definitely did when you were there. You got to just think about the stake, the business.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think there is a lot of value in understanding the organization and understanding the people. And I think it expedites certain things. So over my career, I've run a number of, we'll call them startups within the firm or new initiatives. And, I think a large part of my ability to do that is the fact that I'd been there for so long. I knew all of, the players, and I understood kind of each of their idiosyncrasies. And I think there's tremendous organizational value to that. And, obviously, as an employee, a lot of value to your career.
Yeah. All right. This is not the doesn't carry the same weight as the classic HBS cold call, but it's the question that you alluded to earlier that you knew I was going to ask you, because I'm asking everyone as part of this post-MBA project. But it's the ROI question, and I'm curious because this is the first time I'm asking the ROI question to a private equity veteran here. So, when you think about the ROI on your MBA, how do you think about that, Joe?
Well, it's a tough question. ROI, I think in some ways implies quantitative metric, at least in my mind. And I think the quantitative piece, I would make the argument I have a negative ROI, right? Because I was at the same firm. I had the opportunity cost of not working for 2 years, a year and a half. I did get promoted on my way back, but, could I have made that promotion without it leaving? Probably. So I think, for me, as a person who stayed at the same firm, I can tell you my firm wasn't backing up a truck once I had the HBS, degree, saying here's some more money. I probably didn't, from a pure economic perspective, have a huge ROI. Now, there's also a tiny element to that, right? Just you're only measuring the quote unquote ROI through today, and hopefully I have many, many years to continue to use that degree and find ways to potentially quantitative or financially generate a return. But you have to be seen, right? I think, for me, the other side of the ROI question is really more important, which is not the financial, but the intangibles and the relationships and the experience. And, look, I think from my perspective, that has all been huge. I mean, it's been, I still think it was one of the best times of my life, one of the best experiences I've ever had. I think, the people that I still, interact with, they're caliber of people that I probably would not have any other way of knowing. But candidly, I mean, these are very, stellar individuals doing really exceptional things in various industries that I look up to. And I think just I really am humbled and grateful that I had the opportunity to be in a classroom. And so that intangible element is so huge. I mean, of course, if you don't ask me, would you go back to business school, nor would you go, absolutely, in a heartbeat, I would go back. I would go back. And, look, I think the other thing is, and we're still kind of playing this out because I'm not through my career. I've seen, even in my very short few weeks as an entrepreneur, the doors that open as a result of being affiliated with that school are tremendous, right? I think there's a level of access that you probably don't have otherwise, even if you have kind of a stellar kind of track record in investment banker or private equity. I think that there's definitely a level of access and a level of openness and willingness to help from accomplished people, that are within that network, that I think it's hard to ever put value on. And so I think, for me, I think the value of the ROI is astronomical.
I couldn't have said it better. Appreciate that perspective. I guess now, like almost, we say like 15 years? Where are we at post MBA for you?
Yep. Next year's my thing.
15, big one. Yeah, that being said, 15 years out, any final reflections here, Joe? I've kept you quite a while, but I could keep you longer, but I know you've got other priorities. So any final reflections before we wrap things up here?
No, no. I mean, I think conclusion is you get into HBS, go.
This is not a
Can't talk
commercial,
about
by the
it.
way, either. So
I can't talk about any other school.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
and I think, look, I think my personal philosophy and perspective is any opportunity to continue to learn is a positive one. Any opportunity to be surrounded by, good people is a positive one. And, I live that philosophy. So, I'm an avid reader, read probably, or listen to. A big game changer for me was when I was able to start running and listening to books, my efficiency
I like
gain.
that.
But, I probably listen to a book every other week, or listen to or read a book every other week or every week. And I think that's something that I read a lot of, business books. I think a lot of that spark was started from my HBS days. So I think, to anyone listening, obviously continuous learning, right? The world becoming more and more complex. And I think it's incumbent upon all of us to continue to learn and I think stand ready for that complexity. And so I think, yeah, I mean, just go out there and crush it, I guess.
Great. We'll wrap it there. Joe, thank you so much. Can't wait to post this video.
Thank you for having me. Hopefully, a couple of people find it a little useful.
For sure. For sure. Thanks, Joe.
Cheers.